Hi, my name is Katie Foster, and I'm here with my professor, Jonathan Jensen, and we are studying the determinants of career and institutional athletic director tenure, a survival analysis. So to start, the path to athletic director used to be head coach first, AD second. We saw that a lot back in the 80s and 90s, like Bo Schembechler at Michigan and Barry Alvarez at Wisconsin. College sports have also become a very big business in the past 20 or 30 years. The NCAA brought in $18 billion in total revenue in 2018 and 19 alone. And the highest revenue generated at the D1 level was $219.40 million by one school alone. So there's a lot of money, and college sports have becoming big business, which we see even more so with NIL coming into effect as well. And because of that, ADs are now serving more as CEOs now. So they serve as the face of the athletic department, which includes being held accountable by their internal organization and their goals, as well as external stakeholders, including fans, donors, sponsors, alumni, etc. So they have a lot of influence over very large groups of people, as well as handling $100 million budgets, very similar to CEOs of corporations, and managing departments with hundreds of employees and student athletes. On average, in Division I, the average AD will take care of 407 student athletes, with 176 scholarships and 122 employees. And that's just the average. Obviously, there can be a lot more on the high end. So because of this, their position has become even more important than it was in the past, which means if ADs are leaving their institutions, there's a lot more repercussions when it's such an important figure in the department. So possible outcomes of new leadership that they have found with CEOs and corporations and within the university environment is a resistance 3 phenomenon, where people have a tridimensional negative attitude toward change, which includes the affective, behavioral, and cognitive reactions. And the affective means the emotional. And spikes in involuntary and voluntary turnover and high agency search firm costs. So these are all things to keep in mind and why it's important to study athletic director tenure at the highest level of Division I NCAA. And past research has evaluated athletic directors' education, career paths, demographics, their duties, their organizational effectiveness, their leadership styles, and so on, but not very many have studied the tenure of athletic directors at the career or school level. Several papers have touched on it, but haven't really gone in depth, which is what we are seeking to do with our study. So our purpose of the study is to use survival analysis modeling to examine tenure of Power 5 athletic directors and isolate factors to determine if there are any statistically significant factors that can predict the likelihood of ADs ending or continuing their tenure at their current institution. And this is significant because by better predicting AD tenures, organizations can start strategically preparing for turnover. As I just mentioned, the job security, organizational culture, search agency costs, and employee turnover are all a lot of different repercussions of turnover of athletic directors. In addition, survival analysis has not been widely used in intercollegiate athletics research, which I'll go over later. So it's a great opportunity to implement a new method, and determining what factors influence an AD's tenure to determine whether they stay or leave can also be very helpful. So our research questions for this study are: how many years do AD careers at the NCAA Division I FBS Power 5 level typically last? What is the probability that an FBS AD will either leave his or her institution or end his or her career as an AD? When is the probability of an AD exiting an institution or ending his or her career as an AD the highest? Is it the beginning, the middle, or the end of each term? And are there certain factors that are statistically significant predictors of an AD staying or leaving their institution or ending their career? So kind of diving into the literature that's already been written, looking into the background of athletic directors, there's a lot of research on that, kind of looking at their job responsibilities. Fitzgerald even created a normative career path, which Wong then modeled after, including responsibilities, qualifications, and characteristics, and so on. And Hardin, and then moving on to the role of athletic director with Spinard and Hardin. Hardin found that there's not a lot of involvement specifically with sport administration by ADs anymore, which kind of is a testament to them taking on that AD role even more. And this also looked into their demographic information, their career progression, job satisfaction, and things like that. And then looking more into ADs as CEOs, Latin, Vil, and Speyer, posit fundamental and emerging duties, challenges and qualifications of ADs, and then kind of looking more on the CEO side and applying it to athletic directors as Piercy and Forbes and Allgood and Farrell, looking at the 6 phases of career development of CEOs in large corporations, which is very similar, I found, to the Fitzgerald normative career path of ADs that they did. And then with Allgood and Farrell, they assessed whether the tenure of CEOs had relationships with firm performance and forced turnover, which is something that we hope to see in our results as well. And so our methodology, as I mentioned, is survival analysis modeling, which helps to better understand the duration of time leading up to and the factors that may influence the probability of an event occurring. So to use this modeling, you want to have 3 main characteristics, which is the dependent variable or response is the waiting time until the occurrence of a well-defined event, which in this case is our athletic director tenure. Number 2 is observations are censored in the sense that for some units, the event of interest has not occurred in the time the data are analyzed, which is why this method is very valuable for longitudinal data, and especially for this study, since we're looking at the Power 5 ADs, there are 65 that are still currently serving, so their tenure, which is their event, has not come to an end yet. And thirdly, there are predictors or explanatory variables whose effect on the waiting time we wish to access our control, which is all of our independent variables that I will touch on.
Thanks, Katie. And there's really, to dive into the survival analysis methodology, there's really 3 key metrics that we're going to take a look at before we get into the modeling or looking at the effects of the potential independent variables. And that's the survivor function, the hazard function, and the median lifetime. Let's just take a moment to define those for you. The survivor function is essentially simply the percentage of individuals who have not experienced the event occurrence of interest, or how many, in this case, athletic directors have survived unto the next time period, either at the school level or at the career level. The hazard function is actually the probability of experiencing the event occurrence of interest. So the probability of the AD leaving the school or ending his or her career in each particular year. And then finally, the median lifetime is the point at which the survivor function is exactly 0.5. And the reason why that is interesting to us is that that's the point at which half of ADs have either ended their time in a school or their career, and half are continuing on. And I think we'll make the case through this study that this median lifetime is actually a more accurate way of measuring an AD's tenure because it takes into account both the ADs that have previously ended their time in the school or their career, and also the ADs that are still considered censored, as Katie mentioned, or still active. So it takes into account both a data set that includes all of those and determines, all right, what is the time at which half have ended and half are still continuing.
Thanks, Dr. Jensen. So diving more into the methodology of survival analysis modeling, while I said it has not been used in college athletics, it has been used a little more in other areas of sport as well. Stahl and Hoying saw how to draft order affects playing time and survival in the NBA. There's another study about investigating exit discrimination for NBA players, and then Vols again looked at racial discrimination for quarterbacks in the NFL, and them exiting the league. And where it has been used in college sports, Dr. Jensen has used it quite a few times in his work, analyzing sponsorship, dissolution of NCAA postseason bowl games, and then looking at the conditions that may contribute to the dissolution of those sponsorships, including level of sponsorship offered, regional proximity, and many other factors as well. Wellness analyzed athletic department donor relationship dissolution, and Dr. Jensen went on to look at the conditions that may contribute to that as well. So it's been used a few times in college athletics, but not a ton. So this really gives us an opportunity to use this new method for something different. And as I said before, the variables that we are planning to use, athletic director tenure is our dependent variable. And for each independent variables, we are looking to evaluate on-field performance, academic performance, and scandal by using the NACDA Learfield IMG Directors Cup rankings. Important to note that it's rankings and not the points, since those have changed. And academic performance, we plan on using the graduation success rate. And for scandal, there's an NCAA sanctions resulting in probation, which we are using the NCAA database for that. And then we have several control variables, including gender, race, and ethnicity, and conference affiliation, which is Power 5 versus Group of 5.
So on this slide, the first bit of information we have to share with you is, so this is all career level data. Again, we're looking at both the probability of the AD ending his or her career, and then also each individual tenure at each school. So let's start by just looking at this career level data. And what you see here is what's called a life table. It includes both the survivor function that we talked about, as well as the hazard function in each particular year. So you can see how that varies on a year-to-year basis. So the first thing, let's look at that survivor function. As you see, it basically just goes from 1 all the way down to 10% as a larger percentage of ADs and their careers. But what we're looking for in particular is the time at which that survivor function is 0.5, which as we said, is the median lifetime. And if you look at the life table here, you can pretty easily see that it's between years 13 and 14, very close to year 14, because the survivor function is 0.4997 at year 14. And that equates to a survivor function or a median lifetime of 13.98. So the median lifetime for an athletic director's career is 13.98 years. Moving on to the hazard function, if you look down on the bottom, it's got the overall hazard function for the entire data set, which is 0.0594. So that equates to a 5.94 probability, about a 6% probability that an AD's career will end in any given year. And then looking at how the hazard function kind of varies over time, you can see that there's some years where it is quite low. For example, year 6, it's only 2%. So only a 2% probability that an AD will end his or her career after the 6th year. And as you see, it's pretty consistent in the first 5 years. It ranges from about 4% to 7%. And then looking at a potential year where it's actually quite high, if you scroll down to year 15, you see that it's more than 10%, or 11.25%, more than 11% probability AD will end his or her career after year 15, which you see there was a total of 80 ADs that survived into year 15, and 9 of them ended up ending their time at that time. And then there's 3 ADs that are currently in their 15th year. So that's why it has 3 being censored. So that just gives you an idea of some of the metrics that we've talked about thus far at the career level. Secondly, this is the data at the school level. So because we had to measure each AD's tenure at each individual school, we thought we would break it down a little bit further and look at the data on the school level as well. And similarly, you see how the survivor function kind of decreases over time, all the way from 1 down to 0 at year 26, because no ADs have survived at a school for more than 26 years. And for the median lifetime at the school level, you can see that the survivor function is at 0.5 in between years 4 and 5. So a much shorter tenure, obviously, at the school level. When we run our formula, we get that the exact median lifetime at the school level is 4.59 years. So 4.59 years at each individual school. Moving on to the hazard function, if you go down to the bottom, you see that the overall hazard rate, obviously at the school level, is much higher. It's 13.92, equating to about a 14% probability that an AD will end his or her tenure at a particular school in any given year. So much higher than we had at the career level. And then if you look at some individual years, you see it's pretty consistent, but then year 4 is quite high. It's almost 20%, 19.85. So evidently there's a lot of ADs that are doing 4-year contracts and end up departing after 4 years. And then it's also quite high at year 10. Perhaps that's just a round number. Perhaps they have one 5-year contract and then renew for a second 5-year contract and then end their time because there's more than a 21% probability that an AD will end his or her time in an individual school after year 10.
So these are looking at the graphs of our survivor functions, just kind of more of a visualization of our data. So on the left is our career level data, which is very linear with no really dips or spikes. Their survival kind of creeps along as you would expect. The longer the AD is serving as an AD, the bigger chance of them ending their career, which kind of makes sense just with aging and such. And then if you look to the graph on the right, which is our school level data for survivor function, it's a much steeper drop off in the first few years, and then it levels off, showing the ADs are less likely to survive at their institutions early on. And then that risk kind of levels out and they're much more likely to survive, I guess, past like about year 10, if you're looking at the graph. And then moving on to our hazard function graphs. So looking at the career level graph, as time increases, the probability of an AD ending their career increases right until about the 20-year mark where it starts to fall off. This is a very small drop off because a handful of ADs chose to continue their careers. But as you can see, for the most part, the probability of them ending their career goes up with time. And then moving on to the school function, as you can see, this graph has a lot more dips and spikes in it. And once you get to about the 10-year mark, the graph starts dropping off. So the probability of an AD leaving their institution kind of decreases between the years 10 and 15, and then spikes back up right after that. So it kind of shows that most ADs leave after 15 years, leave their current institution. And only about 8 ADs, when I looked at the data, made it to the 20 years at a single school.
So we have a couple of models that we're going to show you. As Katie mentioned earlier, we're really looking at 3 different potential explanatory variables, and we're just going to share with you one of them today, which is the impact of the performance of the athletic department as measured by the Director's Cup ranking. On the left is the model for the career level data, and you just see nothing is significant. You see we're looking here at the impact of Director's Cup rankings while controlling for the race and the gender of the AD. But if you look on the right here, which is the school level data, the Director's Cup ranking becomes highly significant once you look at the data on a school by school tenure. And that's kind of interesting because what this is saying is that while controlling for the race and the gender of the AD, how the school performs in the Director's Cup ranking actually increases the probability of the AD leaving. And how we want to interpret that hazard ratio on the left there, again, it's above 1, which means it's increasing the probability of the AD leaving. And remember, we're talking about rankings here. So as the ranking goes higher, it gets greater, then that's a bad thing. So essentially how you want to interpret this number is that, let's just say for every 10 spots that you drop in the Director's Cup rankings, or your ranking gets higher by every 10 spots, then that increases the probability that the AD will leave that institution by 3%, 3.82%. So what this is showing is basically a phenomenon whereby if the school drops in the Director's Cup rankings, meaning its performance is getting worse, then it increases the probability that the AD will end that time at their institution. Most likely, this means that if you don't improve in the rankings, if you're falling in the rankings, that it increases the probability that the athletic director is not going to get his or her contract renewed, which is really interesting.
So looking at our initial results kind of compared to the previous findings, research findings that have touched on athletic director tenure, we did find quite a difference. So at the school level, Hardin found that 7.22 years is the average time that an AD serves at one particular institution. And Lumpkin and Wong also found, like, all of them together was about 7 years was the average. Meanwhile, we found our median lifetime to be 4.59 years. And then looking at the career level as well, the average, which Hardin found, was about 10.44 years. Meanwhile, we found it to be longer, so kind of the opposite of the school tenure, at 13.96 years. And this is because our data accounts for ongoing careers, and it also includes 30 years of data and not just looking at like current athletic directors that are serving. Um, so it's given us more of a clearer picture on the average lifetime at the school and career level for athletic director tenure. And then looking forward for limitations in future research. I think doing a study similar to this to look at all of NCAA Division I would be very interesting. And also then looking at Divisions 2 and 3. Lumpkin found that at the Division 2 and 3 levels, ADs typically have slightly longer tenures at their school. So I wonder if that would stack up or if we would find different results, kind of like we have already. And then some limitations to this study is it is limited to the 65 institutions that make up the Power Five. So it's not including the rest of Division One or any other NCAA divisions. We're also using left censor data from ADs whose careers began before the 1993 mark, which is the start of our timeline. And we can never truly predict the reason why an AD leaves an institution. The study instead tries to find the statistically significant relationships between the evaluated factors and AD staying or leaving. So we're kind of looking more for those relationships rather than actual causes and reasons.
Well, thanks so much for your time. Hope you appreciated our presentation. Great job, Katie. And if you have any questions, feel free to, reach out to us, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Thanks.